Single Dad repaired the AC and spoke 7 languages to calm the guests. The CEO watched without a word. The air inside Easton Grand Hotel was thick with frustration and sweat. Outside, New York simmered under a record-breaking July heat wave, but inside the grand marble-floored lobby things were boiling for a different reason. A line of irate international guests crowded the front desk, voices clashing in a dozen languages. The central air conditioning had gone down just as the hotel was hosting an international linguistics symposium. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. "Can someone please fix this?" a British man barked, loosening his tie. A woman in an elegant silk sari fanned herself with a tourist brochure, her face glistening. A Japanese businessman muttered, rapidly, his voice rising with every incomprehensible reply from the staff. Behind the desk, Nina, the young receptionist, barely a year into the job, was floundering. "I'm so sorry," she repeated again and again, her smile stretched thin. "We're doing everything we can." She wasn't. No one was. No one knew what to do. Until a quiet click echoed from the service corridor. The man who emerged looked nothing like a savior. Ethan Cole, in his oil-smudged gray uniform shirt and jeans, moved with the unassuming presence of someone used to going unnoticed. Mid-30s with tired eyes but a composed posture, he carried a modest toolbox in one hand and a folded maintenance checklist in the other. Maintenance. Nina called her voice a little too sharp. "We have a code, red, in the HVAC. I saw the alert," Ethan said simply. "Where's the main duct intake? Somewhere over the grand lobby." She waved vaguely upward. "But please, just hurry." He nodded and walked straight toward the utility access panel, his boots echoing on the tile. As he worked, the room continued to descend into chaos. A German couple was arguing with the concierge about their ruined reservation. A woman with a heavy French accent insisted on speaking to someone who could understand her complaints. The heat wasn't just physical, it was turning the room into a powder keg of miscommunication. Then Ethan stood up. He stepped away from the panel momentarily and approached the French woman. "Excusez-moi, madame," he said gently. "Je suis désolé pour la chaleur. Nous réparons le système maintenant. Vous pouvez attendre ici avec de l'eau fraîche." The woman blinked, then nodded, visibly soothed. He turned to the German couple. "Entschuldigung, die Klimaanlage wird in 10 Minuten repariert. Bitte bleiben Sie ruhig, wir kümmern uns darum." The couple fell silent, confusion and surprise, overtaking frustration. One by one, Ethan addressed each guest, switching from language to language as fluidly as a conductor shifting tempo, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Arabic, Russian. He even joked gently with a small Korean boy by the fountain, asking if he wanted to help fix the AC. Within minutes, the noise had quieted. People were still sweating, yes, but they were calmer, united not by language but by the presence of this unexpected anchor in the storm. Above the lobby, behind a tinted glass panel overlooking the scene, Claire Easton stood frozen. She had arrived just moments earlier, drawn by the growing guest complaints and the breakdown alert on her tablet. As CEO of the Easton Grand, she had built a reputation for precision, efficiency, and keeping her distance. She didn't get involved in frontline drama, she solved problems from the top. But now, from the second-floor balcony, she couldn't look away from the man below. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, his jaw was unshaven, his hair tucked hastily under a cap, but there was a quiet dignity to him. And the way he moved through the room, steady, grounded kind, was something she hadn't seen in a long time. Claire tapped her earpiece. "Who is?" that she asked her assistant on the other end. Which one came the voice? The technician. Speaking. "What is that 7 languages? Hold on." A pause. Then, "That's Ethan Cole. He works night maintenance. Single dad. Keeps a low profile. We almost didn't hire him, he was overqualified." Claire's gaze sharpened. Overqualified, PhD in linguistics, some university background. Left academia a few years ago. She looked again. Ethan was now back at the intake panel, hands deep in wires, calmly humming something under his breath. 2 minutes later, the system gave a low, mechanical groan. Then a hiss. and finally the satisfying whoosh of cold air pouring from the overhead vents. A cheer broke out in the lobby. Guests clapped spontaneously. Someone whistled. Ethan didn't smile. He just nodded once quietly packed his tools and headed toward the back hall like a man finishing a chore. Claire remained perfectly still. The moment had been small, unscripted, barely visible from the surface. But to her, someone who had seen boardrooms filled with performative gestures and empty charisma, what she had just witnessed felt real. Raw, unpolished humanity. She didn't even notice she was gripping the glass railing until her knuckles turned white. Down below, Ethan disappeared into the corridor without so much as a thank you from staff or management. Like a ghost, unseen, unappreciated, and yet absolutely essential. Claire turned away from the window, her mind already racing. That man had just de-escalated a multilingual crisis, repaired a critical system in record time, and managed to do it with grace, humility, and not 1 ounce of ego. Who the hell was Ethan Cole, and why did she suddenly care so much? The next morning, Claire Easton sat in her corner office with the blinds drawn, halfway shielding her from the mid-morning sun. Her desk was lined with paperwork she normally flew through, but today her pen had stopped moving. Her thoughts were still rooted in the lobby last night. She had rewatched the security footage twice, not because she didn't believe what she saw, but because something about it had stirred a part of her that had been dormant for years. That moment when Ethan had kneeled to speak to the Korean boy in his own language, just a soft-spoken sentence, a gentle smile, and the child had laughed, wiping tears with his sleeve. It stayed with her. Not a lot of things stayed with Claire Easton. She was a woman of movement. Fix it, file, it move on. But this didn't move on. It asked her to stay. She tapped her desk intercom. Nina. A moment later, the young receptionist poked her head in. Yes, Miss Easton. Close the door. Nina blinked and obeyed a little stiff. Claire looked up from her desk. You were working the front desk during the HVAC failure last night. Yes, ma'am. It was a nightmare, but it didn't escalate. The technician. Ethan. He handled the guests, Nina said, her tone tightening slightly. Claire picked up on it. You don't sound impressed. Nina's voice went clipped. He's good at fixing things, sure. And yes, the languages were a surprise, but I think some people are just good at putting on a show. He knows how to make people feel like he's some kind of saint. Claire frowned. You think he was performing? I think he knew you were watching. I wasn't on the floor. There are always eyes, Nina replied carefully. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her tablet and pulled up Ethan's employee file. Ethan Cole, age 38. Position Night Maintenance Technician Education, Ph.D. in Applied Linguistics. Columbia University Previous Employment Adjunct Professor, Language Dept. NYU years with Easton, Grand 2. Claire leaned back. A Ph.D. from Columbia, adjunct at NYU. What was he doing replacing air filters and duct belts at midnight? She scrolled further and found a note buried deep in HR comments. Candidate appears overqualified but insisted on night shift availability due to personal schedule. Background check clean. Polite, quiet, respectful. Her fingers paused over a line, single parent. 1 dependent. Medical accommodations requested. Medical, she tapped again. The system, of course, redacted any personal health information regarding dependents. But her mind filled in gaps. She remembered the faint lines around his eyes. Not the lines of age, but of worry. The kind that deepens from watching someone you love fight a silent battle. The more she read, the more the story behind Ethan Cole pressed through the cracks. A gifted man. A kind soul, hiding in a job far beneath his capability. For what? The answer was obvious for someone he loved more than language itself. Claire stood and walked toward the window, looking down at the garden courtyard. A small group of guests milled about with coffee chatting under parasols. The city buzzed in the distance. She saw her reflection in the glass sharp suit arms cross the image of control, but inside her mind was spiraling. Years ago, she had built her reputation on one rule: never get too close. It was how she survived the betrayal of her own trust at a crucial moment in her career. Empathy had once cost her dearly. She wasn't about to make that mistake again. And yet... Her gaze dropped to a maintenance worker walking toward the east building with a toolkit in hand. It wasn't Ethan, but for a moment her heart had lifted. That afternoon, Claire requested a service in her office. The wall panel thermostat had been running cold, and it was just the excuse she needed. At 2:05 p.m., there was a soft knock on the door. She turned, masking her nerves. "Come in." Ethan entered, toolbox in hand. His uniform was clean today, but his hair still stuck up slightly in the back and his sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbow. He offered a courteous nod. "You called for service, ma'am." She gestured to the panel. "Thermostat's been odd. Too cold. I thought maybe a recalibration I can check that," he said simply. As he walked to the wall, Claire watched him, his focus, his stillness. It was the calm of someone used to listening more than talking. "You were impressive last night," she said finally. He paused, glancing back. "Thank you. You knew exactly what to say to each guest." He offered a half smile. "It helps when you know the words they need." Claire's eyes narrowed not with suspicion but curiosity. "You studied linguistics." "Yes." "Why are you here?" Ethan straightened. He could have brushed it off with a joke, but instead he met her gaze with steady honesty. "My son's been sick since he was 6. I needed a job with nights free and steady benefits. Academia didn't offer either." Claire's chest tightened, though she didn't show it. "I'm sorry to hear that." He shrugged gently. "He's the strongest person I know. Makes this..." He gestured around the room. "Easy." They stood in silence. For a long moment, nothing moved but the quiet hum of the building. Claire studied him not as an employee but as a man. There was no bitterness in him, no resentment, just quiet resilience. "You fixed the thermostat," he said, turning back to the panel. "You just didn't know it." She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You made the call." "That's the first step." And with that, he packed his tools and left the door clicking softly behind him. Claire remained standing for a long while, staring at the thermostat. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but something in her had. By the time the next evening settled over Manhattan, the Easton Grand had returned to its smooth, polished rhythm. The symphony of clinking glasses in the rooftop bar, the soft hush of elevator doors opening and closing, the subtle nods of bellmen in black vests, all signs that the machine was working again. But Claire Easton's thoughts were anything but smooth. She sat at the end of a long conference table in a closed executive boardroom, barely hearing a word her assistant was saying about vendor contracts. A name kept echoing in her mind like a half-forgotten tune: Ethan Cole. She had built her entire brand on understanding systems, business models, interpersonal dynamics, risk matrices. But this man, he didn't fit into any matrix. He didn't demand attention. He didn't maneuver for opportunity. He simply existed, quiet, capable, invisible. And that made him impossible to ignore. "Cancel the 11 a.m. site visit tomorrow," Claire said suddenly. Her assistant blinked. "Would you like me to reschedule?" "No," Claire said, standing. "I'll be handling something personally." The following day, Claire appeared in the Lower East Wing unannounced, clipboard in hand, wearing a simple slate blue blouse instead of her usual blazer. She told the front desk she wanted to observe infrastructure alignment firsthand, which sounded technical enough to avoid questions. But really, she just wanted to see him work, without the scripted performance of a request, without the forced politeness of a meeting. Just the man behind the tools. She found him on the service floor inspecting a junction box near the back kitchen. He wore the same work uniform, slightly frayed at the collar, but there was something almost meditative in how he moved, checking, adjusting, double-checking. Alone, unnoticed. Claire stood back, arms crossed, observing for a full minute before speaking. "Not many people triple-test voltage," she said. Ethan didn't jump. He looked up, recognizing her instantly, but his expression remained even. "I've learned it's better to check 3 times than explain once why something exploded." A faint smile crept into her lips. "You have a way with words." "It was a past life," he replied, closing the panel and standing. They began walking together down the corridor. Claire noticed that every time someone passed another employee, a cleaner, a chef, Ethan nodded or greeted them. No one flinched. No one feared him. And yet no one seemed to fully see him either. "You really did teach?" she asked, almost hesitant. "For about 7 years. Columbia, then NYU. I loved it. But things changed. Because of your son," Ethan gave a small nod. "Leo was diagnosed with primary immunodeficiency. Lots of hospital visits, lots of uncertainty. The university didn't exactly love unpredictable schedules." Claire was silent. She could imagine the boardrooms, the meetings, the silent reshuffling of courses until his were the first to go. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be," Ethan replied, not bitter. "I get to walk my son to school every morning. That's worth more than tenure." Claire's throat tightened at the casual strength in his voice. They entered the service stairwell and climbed toward the rooftop maintenance corridor. Claire paused on the landing and looked at him. "Why not tell people what you've done? Your degrees, your background?" Ethan shrugged. "Because it's not who I am now, and if I talk about it too much, I might start missing it." Claire swallowed, feeling something shift in her chest. They reached the rooftop access. Wind rushed around them as the door swung open. The city sprawled before them, alive, pulsing. Ethan stood by the cooling tower checking pressure gauges. Claire stayed back watching the skyline. "I used to think the higher up you went, the clearer the view got," she said. Ethan turned to her. "And turns out it's just more noise. You just stop hearing the people at the bottom." He studied her. "You don't seem like someone who forgets where she came from." Claire smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'd be surprised." They stood in quiet for a moment, the wind tugging at their clothes, the rooftop humming with quiet machinery. Then Ethan spoke, not looking at her. "Claire, why are you really here? It wasn't rude, it wasn't presumptuous, it was just honest." She took a breath. "Because last night, I saw something that reminded me of what this place is supposed to be." He tilted his head. "A hotel at its best is more than chandeliers and 5-star menus. It's a safe place for people who are far from home, and you somehow made people feel that, with a wrench in one hand and 7 languages in your back pocket." Ethan looked down, almost embarrassed. "You reminded me," she said, "that connection doesn't come from position. It comes from presence." Their eyes met then. No romance, no subtext. Just human recognition, deep and real. He cleared his throat. "Do you want to meet?" Leo Claire blinked. "Now. After my shift. We always get milkshakes on Fridays. He'll like you. He thinks people who wear heels are probably superheroes." A surprised laugh escaped her. "That's a first. I told him you were my boss. He asked if you could speak alien. I said we'd find out." Claire grinned. "Then I suppose I have a standard to meet." Ethan nodded, smiling. "Meet us at the corner diner. 6 o'clock." She hesitated, but then nodded softly. "All right." As they walked back inside, Claire felt something she hadn't in years. A beginning. Not of a romance. Not yet. But of trust. And in her world that was rarer than love. The bell above the door chimed as Claire stepped into the small corner diner, her heels tapping softly against the checkered floor. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, and a waitress with a name tag that read Bev in cursive. She was 5 minutes early. She chose a booth by the window, adjusting her blazer. The city buzzed outside, golden hour stretching long shadows down the street. For a brief moment, Claire wondered if she had made a mistake, if this was too personal too soon. She wasn't accustomed to blurring lines. But then the door opened again and Ethan walked in. He wasn't in uniform this time. Just a plain navy t-shirt and jeans, worn but clean. His hair was slightly damp, as though he'd rushed a quick shower after his shift. At his side was a boy maybe 10 years old with sandy brown hair, large eyes, and a red NASA cap that was a size too big. Claire stood. Ethan smiled. "Claire, this is Leo. Leo, this is Ms. Easton." Leo looked up at her wide-eyed. "You're the boss of everything." Claire crouched, slightly amused. "Only the elevators and the scrambled eggs." The boy grinned. They slid into the booth, Leo between them, already pulling a laminated menu toward him. "I'm allowed to order anything," he declared, "even pancakes for dinner." Ethan shot Claire a look. "One night a week, I lose jurisdiction." Claire smiled. "Seems fair." They ordered milkshakes, vanilla for Leo, chocolate for Ethan, and strawberry for Claire, and pancakes for the table to share. The moment the waitress left, Leo leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Dad said you know about languages," he said. "Do you speak alien?" Claire played along. "Only on Wednesdays." Leo tilted his head. "What about cat?" "Just the attitude, not the grammar." The boy laughed, a bright, unfiltered sound. Claire felt it ripple through her, unexpectedly warm. For the next half hour, the conversation flowed like something from another life. Claire found herself answering Leo's riddles, joining Ethan in a back and forth on the quirks of language like why read and read look the same but sound different, and even listening as Leo proudly recited the names of all 8 planets plus Pluto just in case it makes a comeback. But in the lulls between laughter and syrup, Claire watched Ethan with growing admiration. He never interrupted his son, never dismissed a question. When Leo's hand trembled slightly while holding his glass, Ethan subtly steadied it without making a fuss. And when the boy coughed halfway through a laugh, Ethan's hand instinctively reached into his backpack for a small inhaler. It was seamless, practiced, tender. Leo, Claire said gently, "Your dad tells me you're very brave." The boy tilted his head. "Because of the hospitals, because of everything," she said. "Most kids your age don't know what it means to stay strong." Leo shrugged. "I just get tired sometimes. But Dad says we're a team." Claire glanced at Ethan, whose expression was quiet but fierce. "And what about your mom?" she asked softly. Leo's eyes dropped. He stirred his milkshake with his straw. "She passed away when he was 3, Ethan said after a pause. "Leukemia." Claire's chest tightened. "I told him she still listens," Ethan added. "So sometimes he leaves messages for her." Leo perked up. "I wrote one last week in 4 languages. Yeah, English, French, Spanish, and emoji." Claire laughed gently. "That's universal." Ethan reached across the table and ruffled Leo's hair. When the bill came, Claire tried to reach for it, but Ethan stopped her with a shake of his head. "Friday night pancakes are on me." She didn't argue. Something about the moment felt too whole to spoil with polite power games. As they stepped outside, the sky was turning deep blue, the city lights blinking to life like fireflies. Leo skipped ahead to the corner, pointing at a mural painted on the side of a building. "I like her," he told Ethan, not quietly. Claire chuckled. "I'm standing right here, you know." Leo grinned. "Good. You should know." Ethan looked at her a little embarrassed, but mostly proud. Claire turned to him. "Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for saying yes." They stood there for a breath too long. Not romantic, not yet, but real. Something between them had shifted gently, quietly like soil parting for a seed to grow. Before she could speak again, Leo returned, taking his father's hand and yawning. "Big day tomorrow," Ethan said. "Leo has an allergy consult." Claire nodded, stepping back. "Let me know if I can help." He hesitated. "Actually, there might be something." She looked at him, curious. "There's a trial program. Immune therapy. It's expensive, and the wait list is brutal. But if I could just get him on the radar?" Claire didn't speak. She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and scribbled something on the back. "Call this number tomorrow morning. Use my name." Ethan blinked. "Claire, it's not charity," she said firmly. "It's what people do when they care." He looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you." Claire nodded. "Good night, Leo." The boy waved, already leaning into his father's side. Claire turned and walked down the street, heart both lighter and heavier. Somewhere in her chest, where ambition used to be sharp-edged and cold, something softer had begun to take root. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years she wanted to follow it. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It crept in quietly the way real storms often do inside people, not in the sky. For Claire Easton, it started with a boardroom meeting. Rain tapped against the panoramic windows of the Easton Grand's 27th floor executive suite as Claire sat at the head of the long lacquered table. Her senior team flanked her on both sides. Laptops glowed, coffee steamed, smiles were stiff. But Claire's focus was elsewhere, on a name highlighted in a report on her screen. Ethan Cole, status: part-time, non-essential operations staff. Suggested for inclusion in Automation Restructuring Phase 2, we can reduce labor costs by nearly 12% if we transition all routine systems checks to AI-assisted diagnostics and automated maintenance alerts, one of the directors was saying. It's already being piloted in our Chicago location. Claire blinked, coming back to the moment. And that would replace whom exactly? Primarily night shift maintenance, the man replied. Techs like Ethan Cole. There it was, spoken out loud, like a verdict. Claire kept her face neutral. Is this being proposed across the entire chain? Yeah, we've identified a list of candidates whose tasks are 85% automatable. Another director chimed in, nodding. They're great people, but we're running a business, not a charity. The words hit her like a slap, though she didn't flinch. She stared at the glowing screen. Ethan's name. Leo's face flashing in her mind, laughing over pancakes, asking if she spoke alien, waving goodnight like she was someone who might matter. Claire felt a cold knot twist in her stomach. She knew what she should say. Approve the proposal. Stay neutral. Follow the model. No personal exceptions. But she also remembered what Ethan had said that night on the rooftop. If I talk about it too much, I might start missing it. Claire closed the report. We'll revisit this next quarter, she said sharply. A few people exchanged glances. Ms. Easton. We've had no system failures under Mr. Cole's watch in 2 years. Customer satisfaction has remained high. The incident last week was handled better by him than by our own front desk. He's not non-essential. He's the reason our brand still means something. The room went silent. Rain continued its soft percussion outside. Claire stood, meeting adjourned. That evening, she didn't go home. She didn't go to the gym or the rooftop lounge or the endless list of places she used to go when she needed to feel in control. Instead, she walked the quieter halls of the hotel's lower levels, the heartbeat of the building, pipes, boilers, buzzing circuits. And she found herself outside the custodial break room, a humble, windowless space that smelled faintly of coffee and metal. Inside, Ethan was sitting alone, eating from a plastic container. A tablet rested beside him, open to a medical journal. He looked up, surprised. Claire. She stepped in and closed the door behind her. You read immunology papers on your break. He gave a small smile. Helps me feel less helpless. Claire hesitated, then sat across from him. They want to automate your position, she said, skipping all pretense. Ethan didn't look surprised. I figured. You're not just a cog in the machine. I know, he said gently. But I also know I don't get to ask for exceptions. Not when the world's chasing margins. Claire looked down at her hands. She hadn't worn her rings today. It made her feel strangely bare. I pushed it back, she said. But it won't hold forever. The numbers, they don't care about values. Ethan's voice was quiet. Then make the numbers care. She looked at him. "Use me," he continued. "Put me where people see what it means to choose humans over machines. Train staff. Speak to guests. Build programs that only a person can deliver." Claire blinked. "You want to stay and do more. I want to matter. And I want Leo to see me doing something that matters." The simplicity of it, his clarity tore through her. "I don't know if I can protect you in the long term," she whispered. "I'm not asking for protection," he said. "I'm asking for purpose." Silence. Thick but not heavy, like something being reforged in fire. Claire stood. "Let me think." Ethan nodded. But before she left, she turned back. "I had a father who chose the business over family. He thought success made up for absence." Ethan tilted his head. Claire met his eyes. "You're the first man I've met who gave up success to be present, and I've never admired anything more." Then she was gone. The next morning, the storm hit hard this time, literally. A city-wide blackout triggered by a grid overload during an early spring heat wave. Elevators froze. Backups failed. Guests panicked. Chaos brewed again in the Easton Grand's gilded halls. But this time, Ethan was ready. While management scrambled, he led a crew of 3 junior techs calming guests in 4 languages, setting up emergency lights and manually rebooting elevator systems. In the middle of it all, he paused to reassure a nervous child trapped on the 3rd floor with a whispered story about how power comes back faster when we stay brave. Claire watched the whole thing from the mezzanine, hands gripping the railing, heart pounding, not in fear, but awe. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't flashy. He just showed up. Again. For strangers. For her brand. For his son. For truth. By the time power returned, several guests were asking who he was. Someone called him the calm in the storm. Claire smiled. They had no idea just how true that was. The next morning, Ethan woke before the alarm the way he always did. He didn't need a clock anymore. His body moved on instinct, now calibrated by hospital visits, Leo's school schedule, and late-night maintenance calls. His small apartment was still and dim, the first light of dawn sliding across the hardwood floor like a quiet visitor. He tiptoed into the kitchen and brewed a modest cup of coffee. From the bedroom came the soft rustle of sheets and the faint wheezy breathing of a child still asleep. Leo had a checkup later that afternoon. Ethan had taken the day off. It wasn't optional. He never missed doctor days, even if it meant dipping into unpaid leave, even if it meant choosing between groceries and medication later. As he sipped his coffee, a notification pinged on his phone. It was from the Easton Grand HR portal. Routine system update, it read. But something about it made his stomach twist. He didn't open it. Instead, he packed Leo's backpack with snacks and the latest illustrated encyclopedia about space, then carefully folded the appointment papers into his worn canvas bag. The insurance claim form fluttered out and landed on the counter. Pending. Still. Across the city, in a private office 3 floors above the Easton Grand lobby, Claire was on the phone with a man named Dr. Kent Holloway, the director of pediatric immunology at the Stanton Research Center. "I'm not asking for a handout," she said firmly. "I'm offering a referral." On the other end, Holloway hesitated. "Claire, our clinical trials are at capacity. These cases are reviewed by board vote. The waiting list is 6 months minimum. He's 10 years old, Kent," she said, her voice sharpening. "He's smart. He's curious, and his father is raising him alone while working night shifts to pay for inhalers. If he doesn't belong in your trial, then the system is broken." A pause. "Then I can send his file for a secondary review," Holloway said quietly. "Unofficially. But I can't promise anything." "I don't need a promise," Claire replied. "Just a door not locked shut." She hung up, fingers tight around her phone, the weight of the world heavier than her tailored blazer. For a woman used to commanding boardrooms and restructuring budgets in her sleep, this was different. This was personal. And for the first time, it felt right. At the hospital later that afternoon, Ethan sat beside Leo as a nurse checked his vitals. Leo was unusually quiet. His eyes focused on a sticker chart on the wall. The doctor arrived, 15 minutes late, distracted, and barely looked Ethan in the eye. Standard tests, standard notes, standard caution about immune exposure risks. You'll need to refill the immunoglobulin prescription, the doctor said, offhandedly flipping pages. Out of pockets about the same this time. Ethan nodded mechanically, masking the tightness in his chest. Afterward, while waiting in the hallway for the prescription printout, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Cole." The voice was smooth official. "This is Stanton Research Center. You've been referred for preliminary evaluation for the pediatric trial in immune therapy." Ethan froze. I didn't apply. There was a direct referral by name," the voice continued. "A Claire Easton. I know who she is," Ethan said, barely above a whisper. "We'll need your son's records. If all aligns, you'll be invited to our evaluation intake next week." Ethan ended the call slowly, the hallway spinning just slightly. Claire. She had done this. Silently. Without fanfare. He looked down at Leo, who was squinting at a vending machine filled with juices. "Dad," the boy said, tugging at his hand. "Can we get the grape kind this time?" Ethan crouched beside him, hand on his shoulder. "Buddy, we might be able to get something even better soon." Leo smiled as only a child could, believing without asking why. That night, Ethan stood in his apartment kitchen long after Leo had gone to sleep, fingers resting on the countertop. The quiet hummed around him. The refrigerator clicked on and off. He thought of the woman who had handed him a card without strings. The woman who saw more than a technician, more than a single dad with too many tired miles in his eyes. She had opened a door without asking him to prove his worth. He wanted to call her. He didn't. At the Easton Grand, Claire sat in her office with the lights dimmed, staring out at the skyline. She'd kept her promise. Quietly. It wasn't about being seen. It was about making sure someone else didn't feel invisible anymore. There was a knock. Mr. Howard, the building's head of security, a gruff man in his 60s who rarely knocked, peeked in. "Evening, ma'am. Just wanted to let you know we had a few guests ask who handled the power outage yesterday. Said someone spoke to their kids in their native tongue, calmed them down." Claire looked up. "They're asking for a name to write in the guest commendation." "Give them one," she said, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Ethan Cole." Howard nodded, then paused. "You know, a man like that don't come around often. Most folks go their whole careers never meeting someone like him." Claire met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I know." He hesitated again, then stepped in and handed her a small envelope. "Found this. Think it's yours." It was her business card, the one she'd given Ethan. Now returned, with something scribbled on the back. "Thank you for seeing what no one else did." Claire held the card in her hand for a long time, her fingers trembling just slightly. She wasn't used to being thanked. She wasn't used to feeling this much. But tonight she wasn't the CEO behind the glass office. She was just a woman, sitting alone, holding a note from a man who, without even realizing it, had reminded her of who she used to be before power, before performance. Someone who still believed in good things, quiet things, real things. The lobby of the Easton Grand was unusually quiet for a Thursday morning. The fountain in the center gurgled softly, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting geometric patterns onto the tile floor. Ethan stood just outside the staff lounge holding his time card. It was supposed to be just another check-in, but something about the atmosphere felt off. A few employees walked by without meeting his eyes. Nina, the young receptionist he'd once helped during the AC meltdown, passed him with a polite but clipped smile. She usually waved, not today. He swiped his card, but the system returned an error. Access restricted. See supervisor. He frowned. He hadn't missed a shift. He hadn't violated protocol. What was going on? Upstairs, Claire was mid-meeting when her assistant Marissa leaned in with a whisper. "There's been a staff issue. Ethan Cole tried to access the main floor this morning. His credentials were flagged." Claire's eyes narrowed. Why? Marissa hesitated. A system reclassification went through overnight. It came from HR, but the trigger wasn't from you. Claire stood, ignoring the silence in the boardroom behind her. Put everything on hold. Now. Down in the lobby, Ethan had just stepped outside when the familiar figure of Mr. Howard, the longtime head of security, approached. "Hey, Ethan," the older man said, voice low. "Can I talk to you a sec?" Ethan gave a tired smile. "If you're about to tell me I'm being replaced by a robot, I already figured." Howard's mouth twitched. "Nothing like that. Not officially, anyway. But word's going around. Word. That someone's been leveraging connections, pulling strings. Some staff say you're cozying up to the CEO for special favors." Ethan's expression darkened. "She got my son into a trial that could save his life," he said, voice tight. "I didn't ask. She just did it." Howard looked at him evenly. "I know, and I believe you. But not everyone thinks with their hearts in the right place. Some of them think you're making a play. Climbing, using sympathy." Ethan turned his gaze to the windows, his shoulders stiff. "I didn't ask for attention," he muttered. "I just wanted to stay invisible and raise my kid." Howard laid a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I've been in this building longer than the elevators, and I know a good man when I see one. But I also know what jealousy sounds like. It doesn't whisper, it spreads." Ethan gave a tight nod. "Can I at least go back to work today?" Howard hesitated. "You'd need to clear that with HR." That was when Claire's voice cut through from behind them. "He doesn't need to clear anything." Both men turned. Claire stood just beyond the revolving doors, her coat still on wind in her hair. Her eyes were locked on Ethan's, steady and unflinching. Howard nodded and excused himself silently. Ethan looked at her. "They think I'm exploiting you." "I know," she replied, "and it's my fault." He blinked. "What?" Claire stepped closer. "I acted without transparency. I pulled a string because I believed in your worth, but I didn't protect you from how that would look. That's on me." He exhaled. "It was never about favors." "You know that, right?" "I do," she said softly. "But the people watching us, people who don't know your story, they see moments, not meaning." Ethan looked down. "So, what now?" "I fix it," she said simply. "The right way." That afternoon, Claire called an all-staff gathering, rare, unexpected, and unprecedented. The ballroom lights dimmed as employees filtered in. Ethan stood near the back, arms crossed, still unsure what was about to unfold. Claire stepped onto the small stage. No slides, no microphone, just her. "I want to talk to you," she began, "about what matters in this building." The room quieted. Hotels are built on image, perfection, performance. But behind every 5-star review is a person you don't see. Someone mopping a hallway at 2 a.m. Someone fixing a broken thermostat so a child doesn't cry. Someone who speaks to guests in their own language, not because it's in the job description, but because they can. She paused, letting the words settle. "I want to tell you about a man who gave up a career in academia to take a job here, not for money, not for glory, but because his son needed him more than a title ever could." Murmurs, recognition, eyes turning toward Ethan. That man is Ethan Cole, and the only favor he's ever asked is for a shot at doing the right thing, over and over again. Ethan froze as the room turned toward him. Claire stepped off the stage and walked to him. In front of everyone, she looked him in the eye. "If anyone here deserves a promotion, deserves a title, it's the person who reminds us that the heart of hospitality isn't marble or menus. It's humanity." She turned to the crowd. "Effective immediately, Ethan will lead our new guest empathy and cultural outreach initiative. It's a role we created, not out of formality, but because we believe people still matter more than machines." Applause started slowly, then built, then filled the room. Ethan stood stunned. But in his chest, something cracked open, not pride, but purpose. Later that night, as he tucked Leo into bed, the boy looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Dad, are you famous now?" Ethan smiled. "No, buddy. But people heard my story today. That's enough." Leo yawned. "Are they going to hear mine too?" Ethan kissed his forehead. "They already are." The lobby looked different at night. Not because the lights were dimmer or because the music from the grand piano had faded into memory. No, it was the emptiness. The way a space built for noise and movement could suddenly feel like a memory frozen in marble. Claire stood alone near the concierge desk, arms crossed, her reflection caught in the lobby's polished floors. It had been hours since the staff gathering, but the applause still rang faintly in her ears. Not because it was loud, but because it felt real. And yet, something gnawed at her. She glanced at her phone. No new messages. Not from Ethan. She told herself he probably needed space, that stepping into the spotlight wasn't easy for someone who had learned to survive in the shadows. But deep down she feared something else, that by bringing him into the light she had shattered the fragile boundary of trust they'd spent weeks building. People don't stay when you put them on a stage. They run. She knew that. She had lived it. The next day, Ethan didn't show up for his new orientation meeting. HR called him. No answer. Marissa tried emailing. No reply. By noon, Claire left her office and took the elevator to the lower level herself. She walked past the maintenance bay, past the storage rooms, past the old break room with the squeaky vending machine. But Ethan's locker was empty. Everything, his tools, his gloves, even the small photo of Leo taped inside the door, gone. She stood there for a long time, unmoving. Then she turned eyes burning and walked back upstairs. That evening, Claire visited the hospital. Leo wasn't there. Neither was Ethan. The front desk confirmed Leo had been moved off the trial intake list. The appointment had been canceled. No reason given. No follow-up. She stood outside in the cold spring air, feeling as if the wind was trying to scrape something off her skin. Was this his way of walking out quietly, of refusing what looked too much like charity? She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and stared at his name on the screen. Her thumb hovered. She didn't press it. Didn't. Back at the Easton Grand. Mr. Howard, the old security chief, sat in his cramped office finishing a lukewarm cup of coffee when he noticed something odd on the camera feed, Claire alone descending into the employee basement. Again. He sighed. A minute later, someone knocked on his door. It was Nina. She looked nervous. I think I messed something up," she said, voice low. Howard raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I overheard Ethan thanking Claire after that hospital trial call. He didn't say much, just something about how she'd helped him without asking for anything in return." Howard nodded slowly. "And I told HR," Nina admitted. "Not to cause trouble, just—" She hesitated. "Just because I didn't know how to read it. And then people started whispering, and I didn't stop it." Howard leaned back, folding his arms. "Why tell me now? Because he's gone. And I didn't think he'd leave." Howard was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into the drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "He left this with me. Said I'd know the right time to give it to her." Nina frowned. "To Claire?" "No," Howard said. "To you." Nina blinked. "Me?" Howard slid it across the desk. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short note in Ethan's handwriting. "We all carry the weight of what we don't understand. But the good news is we can always learn. No grudge, just hope." Nina pressed her lips together, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't deserve that," she whispered. "None of us do," Howard said gently. "That's why it matters." Hours later, Claire stood on the rooftop terrace of the hotel, the city glowing beneath her. The wind was sharp, but she didn't feel it. This had been their place once, just for one evening. A place where two people who had nothing in common except everything that mattered had stood side by side and spoken like old friends. And now— silence. She closed her eyes. Maybe she had misjudged. Maybe Ethan wasn't ready. Or maybe the world had simply pushed too hard too fast. Not every good thing survives the light. Still, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the business card he had returned, the one he'd scribbled his thanks on. She turned it over in her hand like a talisman. And then, suddenly, a thought. She ran back inside. The next morning, Claire went to Leo's school. She waited outside, standing among tired parents and guardians. The morning bell rang, and the flow of children poured toward the entrance. She watched, and finally she saw him. Leo, wearing that same red NASA cap holding his father's hand. Claire stepped forward. Ethan saw her at the same moment. Their eyes met. He froze. Leo looked up at him, then back at her, curious. Dad Claire walked slowly toward them, heart-pounding, unsure what to say. But when she reached them, she didn't speak to Ethan first. She knelt beside Leo. "I was afraid I broke something important," she said softly. "But I didn't mean to." Leo tilted his head. "Are you sad?" She smiled gently. "A little. Then Dad probably is too." Claire looked up at Ethan, eyes shimmering. "Why did you leave?" Ethan's voice was steady but quiet. "Because I wasn't sure if I still belonged. I'm not used to being someone people talk about." She stood slowly. "You weren't someone we were talking about, Ethan. You were someone we were learning from." Silence. Then Leo tugged his dad's arm. "Can she come with us to breakfast?" Ethan looked at Claire. "Do you want to?" Claire nodded. "More than you know." And just like that, the silence between them began to dissolve, not with grand speeches or apologies, but with the quiet trust of a boy who saw the truth before either of them did. The early morning light filtered through the high windows of the Easton Grand's lower level, casting long stripes of gold across the concrete floor. Mr. Howard moved slowly through the corridor keys, jingling at his side, clipboard in hand. It was quiet this time of day before the hum of guests, before the clatter of room service trays and bell carts. Just the building breathing. He paused outside the old maintenance locker room. Something tugged at him. It wasn't the usual instinct, the kind forged from decades in security, always sensing trouble before it surfaced. No, this was different. It felt like memory. He reached for the key, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. There, taped to the inside of locker G17. Ethan's locker was an envelope. Simple, unmarked, but he knew it hadn't been there yesterday. Howard pulled it off the metal, gently opened the flap, and found a folded piece of paper inside. Not typed, handwritten. Neat, steady script. And across the top, in 7 languages, the same sentence repeated. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest truths. Below it, a letter, addressed to Claire. That same morning, Claire sat in her office, staring at her untouched coffee. Her calendar was filled with meetings she had no intention of attending. She kept thinking about Ethan's face outside the school, guarded, but not cold. A man, still willing to listen. She wondered what he'd say now. If he'd forgive her, if she had done enough to earn that. The chime of her intercom startled her. Ms. Easton Marissa's voice came through. "Mr. Howard's here. He says it's important. Send him in." Howard entered quietly, hat in hand, envelope held delicately between 2 fingers like a relic. He left this, he said, sometime in the night. Claire took it silently. Howard didn't linger. She opened the letter and unfolded the page slowly, almost reverently. Claire. By now, you've probably guessed that disappearing wasn't about the job. It was about the noise. The way kindness sometimes echoes louder than silence, and not everyone knows how to live with that. I didn't. I've spent years shrinking, trying not to draw attention, trying to keep Leo safe, trying to carry this life in both hands without letting it spill. And then you saw me. Not the role, not the resume. Me. You didn't just hold the door. You walked through it first so I wouldn't be afraid to follow. And that scared me more than anything, because no one had ever done that before. But this isn't a goodbye. It's a pause. A deep breath. A place between chapters. Leo needs to see the world not just through my lens, but through yours too. The part of you that believes in people, that fights for them. And when he's old enough to understand everything that happened, he'll know that you were the one who reminded his father how to stand tall again. Until then, if you ever need me, look for the one speaking softly in the corner, in a language only the heart understands. Ethan Claire read the letter 3 times. By the end, her hands were trembling. Not with regret, with clarity. She rose, smoothed her blazer, and walked out of her office with purpose. 2 hours later, Claire entered a small bookstore cafe on the Lower East Side, a spot Ethan had once mentioned in passing. Best second-hand books and even better cinnamon rolls, he'd said. She stepped inside and saw him instantly. Not behind the counter. Not with Leo. Just sitting near the back, a coffee in one hand, a notebook open in front of him, pen moving steadily across the page. The same way he probably wrote that letter. He looked up. Their eyes met. And for a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan smiled gently without surprise, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. Claire walked over and sat across from him without a word. She placed the letter on the table between them, then laid her hand beside it, not reaching for his not expecting. Just there. Ethan closed his notebook and exhaled softly. You got it. She nodded. I needed to hear it. He studied her face, the softness in her eyes. I wasn't sure you'd come. Claire smiled. You signed it until then. Not? Goodbye. That gave me just enough space to hope. A quiet settled between them, not awkward, not distant. The kind of quiet that spoke volumes. The kind where healing lives. After a moment, Ethan asked, Do you still think I should lead that outreach program? Claire tilted her head. No. His brow lifted, surprised. I think you should build it, she continued. From scratch. In your voice. In your way. Not because it saves your job, but because it might save the heart of this place. Ethan stared at her. I've already drawn up a proposal, she said, sliding a printed folder onto the table. But only if you say yes. He opened it. Read the title, Human First, the Empathy Initiative underneath it. A simple subline, curated by Ethan Cole. Later, as they walked outside into the spring air, Claire glanced up at the brightening sky. Leo came running around the corner, a science book in one hand, the red NASA cap bouncing on his head. Dad, Miss Claire, he shouted. Guess what? Pluto might be a planet again. They both laughed. As Leo grabbed Ethan's hand, Claire looked at them, the boy who carried the future and the man who had chosen love over legacy. And in that moment she knew something for certain. Not all heroes make speeches. Some just fix what's broken quietly, patiently until it works again. The Easton Grand buzzed with nervous energy. It was the 15th anniversary of the hotel's flagship opening, a landmark event for the company and a personal milestone for Claire. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant showcase of the brand's history and future velvet-draped tables, shimmering chandeliers, a stage framed by LED panels scrolling the hotel's timeline. Every executive from the Easton chain had flown in. Clients, press, city officials all seated at circular tables, glasses clinking with champagne. It was the kind of night Claire used to thrive in, dignified, structured, strategically illuminated. But tonight, as she stood backstage adjusting the microphone clipped to her collar, Claire felt something new. A pulse beneath the polish. A story waiting to be told. Across the room, Ethan stood near the entrance hands clasped in front of him. He wasn't wearing a uniform tonight. He wore a clean gray suit and a black tie, the kind that had clearly been worn before weddings or funerals, but tonight it carried none of that weight. Leo stood next to him, dressed in a little blazer and sneakers practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad," he whispered, tugging Ethan's hand. "Are there famous people here?" Ethan smiled. "There's someone more important than that. People who remember what it feels like to be seen." Leo nodded solemnly as if that were more impressive than any movie star. Claire stepped onto the stage. The ballroom hushed. Spotlights shifted to her, casting her in that familiar pool of light, the one she used to command like a second skin. But tonight, she didn't feel like a CEO stepping into her kingdom. She felt like a person speaking to other people, and that made all the difference. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight we celebrate 15 years of excellence, but I want to begin by telling you a story, one that doesn't appear in any of our press releases." A pause. Every eye followed her, even the ones who were skeptical. A few weeks ago, a technician at this hotel fixed an AC unit during a critical guest incident. You might say that's routine. But what he did next wasn't. She glanced toward the far side of the room, caught Ethan's gaze. He spoke 7 languages to calm guests from 7 countries, not because it was his job, but because he could, because he saw panic and answered it with presence. A quiet wave moved through the crowd. Claire continued, "I found out later that he had once been a professor, that he gave up academia when his son got sick, that he took a night job no one notices so he could be the kind of father most kids never get to see." She paused, letting the words breathe. In our world, we reward what's visible. Titles, sales, metrics. But sometimes the people holding us together are the ones who never step into the spotlight. Until now. Claire stepped down from the stage. The lights followed her as she walked to the edge of the ballroom where Ethan stood frozen. She took a slow breath. "Ethan Cole," she said, voice clear but soft. "This hotel would not be what it is without you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't met you." Ethan stared at her stunned. Claire extended her hand, not to pull him forward, not to place him in the spotlight, just to meet him. Ethan reached for it. Their hands met in the space between noise and silence. And in that small gesture, the room felt something shift, not upward, but inward. Claire turned back to the audience. This is what real hospitality looks like. It's not marble floors or thread counts. It's choosing kindness when no one's watching. It's listening in a language someone didn't expect you to understand. Applause started slowly, then grew. Louder, fuller, real. Claire looked at Ethan, then at Leo, who had pressed both palms to his mouth in pure awe, eyes wide as saucers. Tears burned behind Claire's eyes, but she held steady. For once, she wasn't performing. She was just telling the truth. After the event, guests milled around, eager to meet the man behind the story. Ethan shook hands awkwardly, signed a few programs, answered questions with quiet humility. Claire found Leo standing alone near the dessert table, staring at a cake shaped like the hotel itself. "It's very square," he said. Claire laughed. "You're not wrong." He turned to her. "You made my dad happy again." She crouched beside him. No, sweetheart. He was already whole. He just needed someone to remind him. Leo considered this. That's like when the moon looks broken, but it's still there just hiding. Claire's throat tightened. Exactly like that. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ethan found her standing on the terrace outside the ballroom, city lights glittering below. "I wasn't ready for that," he said, coming beside her. "Me, either," she admitted. They stood in silence. "Are you still scared?" he asked gently. Claire exhaled. "Every day. But today, it didn't stop me." He nodded, then looked at her with that quiet certainty that needed no decoration. What if he asked this wasn't the ending? She smiled. "It's not." He glanced at the hotel behind them. "And what comes next?" Claire turned to him, her voice sure. "We build something better. Not just a new department, but a different way of leading, a different way of loving." Ethan took her hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. Leo's laugh echoed behind them as he raced across the ballroom floor toward the piano. Ethan looked at her and said, "It feels like the beginning." Claire nodded. "It is." A year later, spring returned to New York, quietly without grand announcements, just the subtle shift of light in the afternoons, the soft scent of blossoms threading through the breeze and the hum of the Easton Grand, resuming its quiet rhythm. But inside the hotel, something had changed. Not in the marble floors or the gold-plated elevators. Those were still there, still polished, still perfect. The real change lived in the people, the way they greeted each other in the hallways, the way they listened more closely, paused longer before speaking. It lived in a program now known across the entire Easton chain, the Empathy Initiative. And at the heart of it was a man who once worked underground, tightening bolts in silence. Now he stood in a sunlit conference room teaching front desk trainees how to say, "I'm here to help" in 6 languages, and how to mean it in all of them. Ethan Cole stood by the whiteboard, a marker in one hand, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. Behind him, a dozen new hires from all over the country leaned forward in their seats, not because he demanded it, but because his presence invited it. "Hospitality," he said, "drawing a circle isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's what happens when someone walks through our doors carrying a story and we meet them in it." He looked out at the room. You don't need to speak 7 languages to make someone feel seen. But you do need to listen like you would if you did. The class nodded slowly, letting his words settle. From the doorway, Claire watched arms folded across her chest, pride swelling in the quiet place behind her ribs. This was the vision that had once only lived in the margins of her heart. Now it was a living thing, walking and breathing in the hands of the man beside her. She stepped into the room as Ethan dismissed the class. The trainees filed out with notebooks, questions, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, they were about to do something meaningful with their careers. Ethan turned to her with a soft smile. "You didn't have to sneak in." Claire returned the smile. "I like hearing you talk when you forget people are watching." He tilted his head. "Is that why you never interrupt? I'm afraid if I speak," she teased, "I'll forget how to listen." Ethan laughed. "You're better at it than you think." She walked to the table where a stack of pamphlets sat, the new version of Easton's hospitality training materials, each one bearing his name. "You ever think you'd be doing this?" she asked. "Every now and then," Ethan said, "when I wasn't too tired to dream." He looked out the window. "Sometimes I still expect to be under a stairwell with a wrench, wondering if I made a mistake giving up my career." Claire stepped beside him. "And what do you think now?" Ethan looked at her. I never gave anything up. I just took a longer route to something better." That afternoon, the 3 of them sat outside the little corner diner, Ethan, Claire, and Leo sharing a plate of fries and milkshakes as sunlight bathed the sidewalk in gold. Leo was now 11, a little taller, his cheeks a little slimmer, his eyes still bright as stars. He wore a blue cap now instead of red. Space was still his passion, but he'd recently added architecture to the list. "I'm going to build a hotel that floats in orbit," he declared between sips. "Every room will have a telescope and 0 gravity beds." Ethan grinned. "Sounds like you'll need a good engineer." Claire winked. "And a really patient CEO." Leo nodded. "I already have both." They all laughed. Then Leo leaned back, sighing contentedly. This is my favorite part of the week." Claire glanced at Ethan. "Mine too," he said softly. The moment lingered warm, whole, unforced. No one needed to say what was growing between them. It had already taken root. In shared silences. In everyday kindnesses. In Friday milkshakes and rooftop glances and the way they reached for each other without thinking now. Love had arrived quietly, without fanfare, without declarations. But it was here. That evening, back at the Easton Grand, Claire stood beside Ethan in the staff lounge-turned-training suite. She held a folder in her hand, a proposal she'd been quietly building for months. She handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "A scholarship," she said, "for hospitality students with family hardships. In your name." Ethan opened it, reading the mission statement. At the bottom, her signature. Next to it, space for his. "I thought we could launch it together," she said, "for the ones who were never seen." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a CEO, not as the woman who helped his son, not even as the person who once pulled him from the edge of invisibility, but as a partner. "You keep doing this," he said. "Doing what's speaking to people the way no textbook ever taught." Claire smiled. "You taught me that." He pulled a pen from his pocket, signed his name next to hers, and closed the folder. That night, after Leo was asleep, Ethan and Claire stood on the rooftop once more. The city shimmered below them, 1,000 lights blinking like distant stars. No one else was there. They didn't need to speak. Not tonight. Instead, they simply stood, hands-intertwined faces, tilted toward the sky. And in the hush between words and the comfort of a shared stillness, they both understood. The most powerful language was the one they had built together. Word by word, step by step. Love not as a performance, but as a quiet, everyday promise. "We'd love to know where are you watching from." The storm had rolled in early that night, black clouds dragging across Manhattan like old bruises. Inside his glass-walled office on the 27th floor, Harold Campiano sat alone, swirling a deep amber scotch in his crystal tumbler. Behind him, the city blinked with rain-smeared light. In front of him, muted on a large monitor, a live security feed played quietly the dining floor of a Campiano's restaurant in Brooklyn. He hadn't meant to watch it. He never did anymore. But habit, or maybe something darker, always brought him back to these grainy windows into the lives he once built. Campiano's had become an empire, 12 restaurants in New York, 2 in Chicago, 1 in San Francisco. It should have been enough, but nothing ever filled the hole she left behind. The footage flickered, then steadied. A young waitress crossed the screen, weaving through tables with a practiced grace. Her dark brown hair was tied up in a loose knot held by a gleaming clip that shimmered like pearl under the dining room lights. Something about her gait, about the way she paused to check on a table of elderly women with gentleness, it caught his breath for just a moment. Harold leaned forward. He knew he was being foolish. Over the past 25 years, he'd seen her 100 times at a crosswalk in a subway in the reflection of his glass of wine. Always a stranger. Always not her. But this girl there was something painfully familiar in the curve of her jaw and the shape of her shoulders. Then it happened. A man in a suit at table 12 stood up too quickly. He was flushed drunk, waving his hand in frustration. The girl, the waitress, apologized, bowing slightly, trying to explain something. The wine glass on his table wobbled, then tipped. Red spread like blood across white linen. The man's voice rose, audible even through the mic filters. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" Harold tensed. The girl stood, frozen eyes wide but silent, and then she turned to walk away. That's when he saw it. As she tucked her hair behind her ear, her neck turned toward the camera, exposing a small distinct birthmark shaped like a teardrop just below her left ear. Harold's hand went limp. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Scotch spread across the polished wood like a stain of memory. He stood, slowly moving toward the desk drawer with mechanical precision. Inside lay an old velvet box. He opened it, revealing a photograph of a baby, swaddled in a hospital blanket, her tiny hand curled around a woman's thumb. The birthmark was there. Plain. Unmistakable. Beside the photo was a small silver clip, a pearl clasp that once held back a newborn's hair for her christening photo. It gleamed under the desk light, identical to the one she had worn just seconds ago on the screen. Harold stumbled back into his chair. His hands shook as he reached for the intercom. "Jared," he said, voice low and tight. Sir, the head of corporate security, answered immediately. "I need a full background check on a waitress working at the Brooklyn Heights location. Her name, find her name. Cross-reference all hiring documents, employee files, anything." He didn't wait for a response. Back at Campiano's Brooklyn, Ella Reynolds stood motionless in the break room, blinking away tears. Her apron was stained with Merlot, her hands cold. It wasn't the first time a customer had raised his voice. But tonight, something cracked. It wasn't the insult. It was the exhaustion of pretending it didn't hurt. She turned the old clip in her hair absent-mindedly, a simple thing vintage and chipped at the edges. Her foster mother had given it to her on her 7th birthday, saying, "I found this with you when they brought you in. I always thought it was too fancy for an orphan." Ella never told anyone how often she stared at it, wondering where it came from. Who it came from? The break room door creaked open. A man in work boots and a blue button-down shirt stepped in, carefully holding a roll of electrical tape and a toolbox. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked with grease. He had kind eyes. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. Ella quickly wiped her face. "Fine. It's just wine, not blood." He hesitated, then pulled a clean napkin from his back pocket and offered it. She took it silently. "You handled that pretty well," he said. "Some folks yell right back." She let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, well, I need the job more than I need to be right." He gave a thoughtful nod. "I'm Jack. I handle maintenance for the Brooklyn and Tribeca branches." "Ella." "Well," Ella Jack said, glancing toward the kitchen, "I think you've got more strength than you think." She looked at him, then really looked. He wasn't offering pity, just presence. A stillness she hadn't felt in a long time. From outside, a child's voice called. Dad Jack turned. "Be right there, sweetie." Ella watched as a little girl peeked into the doorway, freckles pink sneakers and a backpack nearly her size. "Sorry," Jack said sheepishly. "She does homework while I work late. Her name's Lily." Ella smiled, faintly warmed by something she couldn't explain. "Nice to meet you, Lily," she said softly. The girl beamed. "You're really pretty." "Are you going to marry my dad?" Jack groaned. "Okay, that's enough matchmaking for one night." Lily giggled and disappeared again. Ella laughed a real one this time, and Jack looked relieved. Back in his office, Harold stared at the monitor. She was laughing now, carefree, radiant, and it hit him like a punch to the chest. He whispered to the empty room, "God help me." "Is that you, Isabel?" He hadn't said the name out loud in years, but the name tasted like sunlight and warm arms, like a promise broken and still waiting to be fulfilled. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. If this girl really was her, it would change everything, and if she wasn't, he'd lose her all over again. But this time, he wouldn't walk away. The smell of scorched wires lingered faintly in the air as Jack Miller knelt beneath the industrial stove at the Campiano's downtown location. The outlet had blown again 3rd time this month, and though it was a fire hazard, corporate refused to shut down operations during peak hours. So they called Jack. They always did. He didn't mind. Jack liked the quiet, like the hum of electricity, and the way fixing something with his hands helped silence the static in his head. It was the silence of grief that still buzzed sometimes 5 years since Beth's accident, and it could still swallow him whole if he wasn't careful. But tonight, the silence was interrupted by a voice. "Dad." "I finished all my spelling words." Jack turned, peeking up over the counter. Lily, in her oversized hoodie, was seated at table 6, swinging her legs and beaming like she'd just won an Olympic medal. Her backpack was unzipped crayons and flashcards spilling out like a mini explosion of chaos. He smiled, wiping his hands on a towel. "That's awesome, sweetheart. Let me finish this last wire and we'll check them together. You always say that she teased, but she returned to her drawing content." A waitress passed by with a tray of pasta, and Jack recognized her instantly. Ella, the same girl from Brooklyn. He hadn't realized she'd been transferred downtown. There was something different about her here. Less guarded. Still quiet, but more composed, like someone learning how to breathe again after being underwater too long. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. She blinked, surprised. He gave a small wave, half expecting her to walk past. But instead she paused. "You're following me now," she said dryly, though her mouth quirked upward just enough to give it away. Jack grinned. "This time I had a work order. But maybe fate's following you." Ella rolled her eyes. "That's cheesy. I'm a single dad. Cheesy is all I've got." She glanced over at Lily. Your daughter's cute. She's terrifying. Brilliant, but terrifying. I like her already. He stood brushing dust off his knees. You like intimidating small children? No, I like people who say what they mean. Jack didn't reply at first. Instead, he reached behind the counter, grabbing 2 bottles of sparkling water and handing one to her. To saying what you mean, he said. She hesitated, then clinked her bottle gently against his. To that. They stood there for a moment, silent but not awkward. There was something comforting in the ease of their exchange, like slipping into a forgotten rhythm. Jack didn't know what it was about Ella, but something in her reminded him of himself from years ago. Lost, but holding on with quiet courage. Then he noticed the hair clip. She bent to tie her shoe, and the light caught it again. A silver clasp shaped like a petal, inlaid with tiny pearls. It was old elegant, out of place on someone like her. That's a nice piece, Jack said casually. Ella's fingers brushed it. Yeah, kind of strange, isn't it? I've had it as long as I can remember. Where did you get it? She shrugged. My foster mom said it came with me. I used to think it belonged to someone rich, like a lost princess or something. Jack chuckled. I can see that. Yeah, well, that was before I learned that foster care doesn't come with fairy tales. There it was again. The wall. He could feel it between them, rising like a shield she didn't even know she was lifting. He decided not to push. Some of the best stories don't start pretty, he said, but they end better than you'd ever expect. Ella tilted her head. Are you always this positive? No, Jack admitted, but I've learned that hope is a habit, and I've got a little girl who watches everything I do. She smiled, small, soft, real. She's lucky. No, Jack said, glancing at Lily with warmth that seemed to radiate from his very core. I'm the lucky one. Ella looked away, but not before he saw the flicker in her eyes. Longing, maybe, or memory. He didn't press it. He just stood with her in the silence, offering presence instead of pressure. Across the room, Harold Campiano stepped into the restaurant's front vestibule, unnoticed, his overcoat damp from the rain. He moved like a man walking through a memory, slow, precise, hesitant. He wasn't there for dinner. He was there for her. From the far end of the dining room, his eyes locked on Ella. She laughed at something Jack said, head tilted slightly, the pearl clip catching light once more. That laugh, it wasn't a stranger's laugh. It was Isabel's. It was the echo of his wife's laughter when they danced in the kitchen with their newborn swaddled in his arms. It was 30 years of waiting and searching condensed into one instant. He stepped forward, then stopped. She looked so alive, so herself. What would he even say? Excuse me, you might be my daughter. No, not here, not like this. He turned and left quietly unnoticed. Later that night, after the restaurant closed, Jack gathered Lily's things as she finished her drawing. Done, she exclaimed, holding up a crayon portrait, a woman with a bun, a man in blue, and a small girl with 2 braids. Ella looked over, eyebrows lifting. Is that me? Lily nodded solemnly. I put you in because you make Daddy smile. He hasn't smiled like that in a long time. Jack turned away, but not before Ella saw the way his jaw clenched and eyes watered just slightly. She knelt beside Lily and whispered, Thanks for including me. I think it's the best picture I've ever been in. That night, as Jack drove home with Lily asleep in the back seat, he kept thinking about Ella. And somewhere across town, Harold stared at his phone, Ella's employee profile pulled up on screen. He tapped the screen once, then once more, and whispered, Please, let it be you. Ella stood at the locker in the back corridor of the Brooklyn Heights Campiano's, fingers fumbling with the dial. Her shift had just ended, but her heart still raced from the unexpected visit by someone she didn't even realize had been watching. The manager had called her in 5 minutes earlier and handed her a corporate sealed envelope. Head office wants you transferred to the flagship in Manhattan, he said with a neutral face, but the tone behind his words hinted at something else. Reluctance, maybe even irritation. effective immediately. You start tomorrow, no warning, no explanation, just go. Ella reread the letter for the 5th time, the words blurred, heavy, and strange. Selected for developmental opportunity at Campiano Central, potential management track, temporary relocation, full salary continuation. She'd only worked here 6 months. Before that, she'd bounced between waiting tables and cleaning offices, always one bad shift away from being let go. But now, they wanted her at the flagship on a management track. It didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like being watched. Across the city, Harold Campiano sat in the back of his private car, a black Lincoln with leather seats that always felt colder than they looked. Rain glazed the windows as the driver eased through midtown traffic. "Is she on the schedule for Central?" he asked without looking up from the file in his lap. "Yes, sir," replied Jared, his discreet security chief seated beside him. "Shift starts tomorrow at noon." Harold nodded once. The file in his hands held everything they'd found, what little there was. No birth certificate, no known biological family, registered in the foster system at 18 months, multiple placements, mostly stable but no formal adoption ever completed. And then there was the clip. He held the photo beside the printout of the current video still. Side by side, they were identical. And yet, he was terrified. What if he was wrong? What if he stepped into this and shattered a stranger's life just to try and fix his own? At home that night, Ella sat alone on the edge of her couch, the apartment too quiet around her. Her foster mother had been moved to a care home just 2 weeks earlier, her memory vanishing by the day. The silence in the apartment felt like it was growing claws. She took the clip from her hair and held it between her fingers. Its edges were smooth now, worn down by years of habit. It was her only keepsake, the only thing that had followed her from group home to group home like a ghost of something forgotten. Sometimes she imagined it had belonged to a mother who loved her, who meant to come back. Tonight, for the first time, she wondered, what if that was true? She turned her head toward the small box of belongings she hadn't opened in months. Letters, scraps, a single childhood photograph of her in an unknown garden, with a woman whose face had been torn away by time. Ella opened the box slowly. Inside, tucked into a folded piece of paper, was a hospital tag, Reynolds, female, 3 days. No first name. No date. Just that. She stared at it, her heart a fist in her chest. The next morning, Manhattan greeted her with gray skies and a wind that cut through her coat. The flagship Campiano's looked nothing like the warm, brick-lined Brooklyn location. This place gleamed modern lines, chrome fixtures, velvet curtains on the windows. It felt like a place meant to be looked at, not lived in. The manager at Central, Mrs. Rivera, was a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense bun and the sharp gaze of someone who had survived decades in fine dining without losing a single tablecloth to carelessness. "You must be Ella," she said without smiling. "They've given you 4 days a week, lunches and prep. You'll shadow Emily and Nicole for service protocols." "Yes, ma'am." Rivera studied her for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "Good posture. Don't smile unless you mean it. Guests can tell." As Ella changed into her new apron and surveyed the dining hall, she felt the air shift around her, not just from nerves. It was like the building knew something about her she didn't. At one corner table sat a familiar pair of eyes, Jack and Lily. He looked surprised but happy to see her standing halfway out of his chair before managing to steady himself. "Well," he said when she reached their table, "look who followed me this time." She laughed, nervous but honest. "Apparently, I've been promoted. Not sure if it's real or a prank." "I like it," Lily chirped. "It's fancy here. The bathrooms smell like vanilla." Ella glanced around. "It's different," Better Jack asked, searching her face. She shrugged. "I'm not sure yet." There was a pause, a space between words where meaning lived. Then Lily slid a napkin toward her. On it was a new crayon drawing. Ella, Jack, and Lily again. But this time there was a fourth figure in the corner, small, older with a cane and a big smile. "That's your mom," Lily said confidently. "The one you're gonna find soon." Ella froze. Jack looked startled, turning toward his daughter. "Lily." What the girl said innocently. "She's been sad because she doesn't know her real family. But I think someone's looking for her like in those movies where they get separated and then they hug in the rain." Ella's throat tightened. She wasn't sure if she wanted to cry, laugh, or just walk away and hide. But instead, she reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's beautiful." Behind the glass wall that separated the dining room from the corporate offices, Harold Campiano watched it all unfold. His heart trembled against his ribs. She had the same way of pausing before saying thank you, the same way of folding her napkin once she stood. Every detail matched what he remembered from long ago. And still he didn't step out. Not yet. He had waited 25 years. He could wait one day more. Ella sat on the worn carpet of her living room floor, the edges of an old cardboard box brushing against her knees. It was well past midnight, but sleep had never arrived. Her shift at Campiano Central had ended hours ago, yet her mind refused to slow. Something was shifting. The air. The way people looked at her. Even the sudden transfer. It didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a setup. But she couldn't tell if it was good or bad. The box before her hadn't been opened in years. She kept it under her bed like a time capsule from a life no one had ever asked her about. Inside were fragments, pieces of herself with no glue to hold them together. A baby sock. A postcard from Kansas she didn't remember receiving. An adoption pamphlet with notes in a social worker's hurried handwriting. Then, near the bottom, she found it. A folded envelope with fragile creases and faded ink. Her name was written in shaky cursive on the front. She stared at it, not breathing. It wasn't her foster mother's handwriting. That woman had always printed in all caps block letters like someone afraid of being misunderstood. Ella opened it slowly. Inside was a small black and white photo, her as a toddler, no older than 2. Chubby cheeks, arms outstretched. She stood in a garden with overgrown grass next to a woman whose face was half-turned from the camera, nearly blurred out of frame. The woman's hand rested gently on her shoulder. On the back, a single sentence was scrawled in faded pen. "She wasn't mine by blood, but I couldn't let her disappear again." Beneath the photo was another relic, a hospital bracelet. Reynolds, female. 3 days. That was it. No date, no time of birth, no mother's name. Ella sat back, her breath shallow. She remembered the story vaguely told once when she was maybe 13. Her foster mother had been vague. "You were dropped off at a hospital. No one claimed you. They passed you around for a bit and then I got the call. That's all." But that wasn't all. This bracelet, this photo, the letter. They were pieces of something buried. Something someone had tried to hide, maybe even protect. Her hand moved to the clip in her hair again. Where had it come from? The next morning at Campiano Central, Mrs. Rivera was in a mood. She stood at the host stand, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning like a hawk tracking prey. "Ella," she called. Ella stepped forward, tying her apron. "Yes, ma'am. I'm assigning you to table 21 today. High-profile reservation. Don't speak unless spoken to. Stay sharp." Ella nodded, confused. Table 21 was rarely used. It was reserved for private parties, usually shielded by a tall partition for discretion. No one had told her who was coming. By noon, the atmosphere had shifted. The kitchen was quieter. Even the chef, normally loud and impatient, kept his voice down. When Ella stepped into the dining room, she saw him. The older man, seated at a table 21, wore a navy suit, subtly tailored with a tie the color of aged wine. He looked like someone used to silence the commanding kind. His silver hair was neatly parted, his posture straight, dignified. He looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. As she approached with a tray of water glasses, he looked up. Their eyes met. Her breath hitched just for a second. There was something in his face, not recognition exactly, but something gentler. like he knew her laugh from another life. "Good afternoon," she said, voice steady. "Welcome to Campiano's." "Thank you," he replied softly. She set the water down, noticing how his hands trembled just barely when he reached for the glass. Then his eyes fell on the clip in her hair. She caught the movement. She saw how his fingers paused mid-air. She could feel him watching it. "Would you like to hear today's special, sir?" she asked, trying to distract from the way her pulse hammered in her ears. He shook his head. "No, thank you." She left the table, quickly escaping into the kitchen like she'd touched something hot. Harold Campiano sat back breath shallow. The clip. It was her clip. Or one exactly like it. He had stared at the original so many nights he could trace its pattern blindfolded. But it wasn't just the clip. It was the way she stood, the way she folded her hands when she paused, the way her voice had the faintest tremble when she said, "Good afternoon," but never let it crack. His daughter had once gripped his finger with that same resolve as a newborn, so tight he'd laughed through tears in the hospital. He looked down at the table, unsure whether to cry or get up and walk out. He hadn't said her name in years. But it burned on his tongue now like a prayer. Isabel. That night, Ella walked home in the foggy dusk. The air was thick with the smell of rain and concrete, the kind of weather that made old ghosts feel near. Her thoughts swirled the man, his expression the unmistakable way his gaze clung to her. Was it admiration, curiosity, or something deeper? When she reached her building, she paused before unlocking her door. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jack. "Lily says hi. She drew you another picture. I think it's got a puppy this time." Ella smiled. She typed back, "Tell her I'm honored. I needed something soft today." She didn't mention the man. She didn't know why, but something inside her whispered, "This isn't coincidence. It's connection, and it's coming for you, ready or not." The following week passed in a strange kind of limbo. Ella moved through her shifts at Campiano Central like a ghost who remembered the steps of the living but wasn't sure she belonged among them. Every time she approached Table 21, even though the man in the navy suit hadn't returned, her chest tightened. Something had changed. Not in the schedule, not in the food, not even in the rules, but in the way the world watched her. Mrs. Rivera began assigning her to more high-profile tables. The kitchen crew had stopped calling her new girl and started offering her coffee without asking. Even the head chef, a tyrant with a steel temper, asked for her opinion on plating twice. She should have been thrilled. But Ella had lived long enough on the margins of certainty to know when things didn't add up. Jack texted her twice that week. Once to send her a photo of Lily in oversized rain boots standing beside a cardboard sign that read, "Puppies wanted." No puppy, no plan, just optimism. The second text came after a rainy night shift. "If you're ever tired of being polite to strangers, there's always leftover pizza at our place." She never answered. Not because she didn't want to, because she did. Too much. On Thursday afternoon, her break finally aligned with Jack's maintenance visit. He was replacing an air filtration unit in the back kitchen, grumbling good-naturedly as he balanced on a stool that clearly wasn't built for full-grown men. Ella leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching him with a half-smile. "You know, you could just ask for a ladder." "Where's the fun in that?" She tilted her head. "And if you fall?" He looked down at her and grinned. "Then at least I'll be in the right place for dinner." There it was again, that effortless ease between them. The kind that didn't need to be explained, only felt. The kind that made her wonder what it would be like if she allowed herself to just stay. "I got a weird feeling last night," she said quietly, more to the room than to him. "Like I was being watched. Not in a creepy way, just observed." Jack paused, then stepped off the stool. "You think someone's following you?" "No, not like that." She hesitated. "More like someone's looking for something in me. Something I don't know how to give." He nodded, slowly, serious now. "You ever think it might be someone seeing what you don't?" Ella looked down at her hands. "That's the problem. I don't know what there is to see." Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden star. He offered it to her. "What is this?" "Lily made it. Said it was for you." Ella turned it over in her palm. It was imperfect edges, uneven, the middle painted gold. She said, "You looked like someone who forgot she used to shine." Ella's throat tightened. Jack shrugged, trying to play it casual, but there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. Kids don't lie about things like that. That night, Ella couldn't sleep. She sat on her fire escape, the wooden star in her lap, staring out at the city lights bleeding into fog. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who used to dream she was a missing princess. The one who imagined a mother somewhere painting or dancing or reading by a fireplace waiting for her return. And then she thought about reality. The boxes, the bracelet, the strange man at table 21. It was as if her past had quietly walked back into her life, waiting for her to notice. Meanwhile, inside a townhouse in the Upper West Side, Harold Campiano stood in front of an open safe. He pulled out the photo again. The same clip, the same eyes. He'd asked himself 100 times if he was sure, and tonight he was done asking. He pulled out a folder from the safe, an adoption record filed under sealed. It had been the last traceable clue before the trail went cold 24 years ago. The mother listed unknown. But now he had a name, Ella Reynolds, and a plan. The next day, Ella arrived for her shift early, half in hopes that the kitchen would be quiet, half to breathe. But as she entered, she saw Mrs. Rivera waiting. "Change of schedule," Rivera said. "Mr. Campiano is coming in for lunch. He's requested you personally." Ella froze. The owner Rivera gave a clipped nod. The owner. "Why me?" Rivera didn't answer. She just handed Ella a fresh apron and said, "Iron it. And don't be late." When the lunch crowd thinned and the restaurant quieted, Ella walked toward table 21 with a practiced smile and her pulse pounding in her throat. Harold sat alone, his expression unreadable, hands folded. "Good afternoon," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her face with something like reverence. "Miss Reynolds," he finally said, "would you sit with me? I'm just staff, sir. Not today." She sat unsure why. Then Harold reached into his coat and pulled out a familiar object, a copy of the same hospital bracelet she had tucked away in her box at home. He set it on the white linen tablecloth between them. Ella's breath caught. "I believe he said gently that you may be my daughter." The world didn't fall silent. It shattered. Not with sound, but with everything it had taken her years to hold together. She stared at the bracelet, then at him, and all she could whisper was, what the bracelet sat between them on the pristine white linen like a detonator, quiet but capable of blowing her world apart. Ella didn't move, didn't blink. Her hands stayed folded in her lap knuckles, bloodless. Harold Campiano sat opposite her, composed in the way only people with practice at grief can be. There was nothing dramatic about his delivery. No tears, no dramatic reveal. Just the calm certainty of someone who'd waited so long for truth that the silence now felt sacred. "I don't understand," she said at last, her voice low and tight. "Why would you think that? Why me?" He didn't reach across the table. He didn't invade her space. Instead, he nodded toward the bracelet. "When you were taken from the hospital 25 years ago, that tag was all that was left behind. The nurses said you were wearing it. We kept it. Hoping." "I wasn't taken," she said quickly, instinctively. "I was left at a hospital, in Kansas. When I was a baby." His jaw tightened. "Yes, because that's where she brought you. After she disappeared from New York. The woman who took you, who raised you, worked in one of our kitchens. She disappeared the same night my daughter was kidnapped." Ella's breath caught. "You think she stole me. I think she was sick. Desperate. And I think she thought she was protecting you in a way only she could understand." Ella stared at him. Her mind flashed to the torn photograph, the letter, the faint tender writing. She wasn't mine by blood, but I couldn't let her disappear again. I don't remember her ever hurting me, she whispered. I don't think she meant to, Harold said. But what she did, it wasn't right. You had a family. You had a name. He pulled a photograph from the inner pocket of his jacket and placed it gently beside the bracelet. In the photo, a younger Harold held a baby in a hospital room, his wife leaning in beside him, smiling. The baby had a head full of dark hair, tiny fingers wrapped around Harold's thumb. Her name was handwritten in the corner, Isabel Ann Campiano. Ella stared at it as if looking too long would make it disappear. I remember nothing, she said, voice shaking. I don't remember you. Or her. I don't even remember Kansas that well. That's okay, Harold said. You don't have to remember. I just need you to know. The photograph blurred in her vision. She stood up suddenly. I need to go. Ella, she shook her head. I'm not ready. I don't know what this means. You don't have to know right now. But you've known, she said. You've known for what weeks, months you had people watching me, moving me to Manhattan. You've been pulling strings while I've been serving pasta and wondering why everyone suddenly cares if my apron is ironed. Harold didn't deny it. I had to be sure. She backed away. And what now? You want me to... What, come home with you? Let you rewrite 25 years of someone else's life? No, he said softly. I just want you to know you were never forgotten. Not for one single day. That stopped her. The words didn't feel like a weapon. They didn't sound like guilt. They sounded like mourning. Still, she turned and walked away, the bracelet and photograph left untouched on the table. Outside, the cold March wind slapped her cheeks. She didn't cry. She couldn't. It felt like her body had gone numb, her chest packed with cotton and cement. She walked without direction, block after block, past brownstones and bodegas, construction sites, and yellow cabs. Finally, she ended up where her legs always seemed to take her when the world felt unstable, Jack's apartment. It wasn't glamorous, just a second-story walk-up with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox, but the lights were warm, and the sound of Lily's laughter leaked through the crack under the door. She almost left. Then the door opened. Jack stood there holding a pot of macaroni with a wooden spoon sticking out like a flag of surrender. Hey, he said, surprised. You okay? She looked at him, just looked until her chin wobbled. I think someone just told me I don't know who I am, she whispered. Jack put the pot down without a word and stepped aside. She came in and collapsed onto the couch. Lily was on the floor drawing another picture, this one of 3 stick figures and a dog with a pink collar. I made you a puppy, she said proudly, showing it to Ella. Her name is Toast. Ella laughed a broken sound. Thank you. Jack handed her a glass of water, sat across from her, and waited. She told him everything. The bracelet, the photo, the man with her face in his eyes. When she finished, Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, That's a lot. But it doesn't change who you are, doesn't it? No, he said. You're the woman who brings Lily napkins folded into flowers, who works 12-hour shifts and still remembers people's birthdays, who looks at everyone like they deserve a second chance even if no one ever gave her one. She bit her lip hard. He said my name was Isabel. Do you like it? She thought for a second. No. I like Ella. Jack smiled. Then that's who you are. Late that night, alone again in her apartment, Ella stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked the same. But something inside her had shifted. Maybe Harold Campiano was right. Maybe she'd been taken from a life meant for her. But maybe, just maybe, she'd become someone stronger than that life ever could have made her. She wasn't a missing piece in someone else's puzzle. She was her own. And whatever came next, it would be on her terms. But first, she had to decide, would she run again, or finally turn and face the truth? It had been 3 days since Ella had walked out of Campiano Central with the photograph and bracelet burning a hole in her bag. 3 days of silence. She hadn't returned Harold's calls, hadn't answered Mrs. Rivera's increasingly cryptic texts, and she definitely hadn't shown up for work despite the sense of guilt tugging at her every time she passed a restaurant window. Instead, she stayed in her apartment, her tiny second-floor space that smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish where nothing fancy had ever happened, and no one had ever called her anything but Ella. It was safe, small, familiar, and suddenly it felt like a lie. She sat on her couch with the photo again, staring at the baby in Harold's arms. Her eyes, Ella's eyes, were crinkled with laughter. The woman beside him, presumably his wife, had the kind of beauty that felt effortless. Her hands were wrapped protectively around both of them, and on her pinky, a delicate ring, a single pearl. The same shape, Ella realized slowly, as the clip she still wore in her hair. She reached up and touched it. The curve of it no longer felt ordinary. It felt like a breadcrumb someone had left behind on purpose. That evening, Jack showed up with takeout and a tired smile. He didn't ask permission. He just set the food on the coffee table and dropped down beside her like he belonged there. Because somehow, by now, he did. Lily was at a sleepover, her first ever, and Jack looked halfway like a man with free time and halfway like a father trying not to call the host family every 10 minutes. Ella didn't say anything for a while. She just leaned her head on his shoulder. Jack let her. I keep thinking, she murmured, that if I open the door to all of this, I'm going to lose myself in it. Like I'm going to become who they want me to be, not who I chose to become. Jack was quiet. Then he said, "You know what I remember most about law school? You went to law school for about 5 minutes, before Lily came along." He smiled faintly. "But yeah, I remember the professor saying something that stuck with me. He said, your name might come from your parents, but your character, that's yours to shape. No court can change that." Ella looked at him. Jack met her gaze. "You're still you, no matter where you came from, no matter what he says." "I don't even know if I want to be found," she admitted. "Part of me still wants to believe my life, this version of it, is enough." He nodded. "But part of you wonders who you might have been." Ella nodded back, voice barely above a whisper. Yes. The next day, she made a decision. Not because she was certain, but because running hadn't brought her peace and maybe standing still would. She called Mrs. Rivera first. The woman answered on the second ring with clipped formality. "I was told not to pressure you," Rivera said immediately, "but I'm relieved you called. Is he still in the city, Mr. Campiano?" "Yes. Can you tell him I'll meet him?" 1 hour, but not at the restaurant. "Where then?" Ella looked out the window, eyes landing on the small neighborhood park where she used to read after late shifts. The place with the rusted bench and the creaky swing. A park in Brooklyn. I'll send the address. The sun was low in the sky when Harold arrived. He walked slowly, not like a man who was old, but like someone trying to remember how to be gentle. Ella sat on the bench already, her back straight, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't stand when he approached, but she did nod toward the space beside her. He sat. Neither spoke for a full minute. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why didn't you say my name that day?" He turned slightly surprised. At the restaurant, she nodded. "I didn't know if I had the right." That surprised her. "You're my father." "Yes. But you didn't know that, and I didn't want to take something from you without asking." She looked down at the bracelet now resting in her palm. "Isabel," she said aloud, testing it. It sounded soft, formal, like a name meant for someone who knew which fork went with which salad. "I don't remember that name," she said finally. "I know. I don't feel like her." Harold smiled gently. "Then don't be. You don't owe anyone the person you used to be or the one we imagined you'd become." He reached into his coat again and handed her something else. A letter, sealed, yellowed slightly at the edges. "My wife, your mother, wrote this the week you were born," he said. "She kept a journal for you. This was the first letter. We were saving it for your 18th birthday." Ella stared at the envelope. She didn't open it, not yet. She tucked it into her coat pocket like something fragile. Then she said, "I'm not ready to change my name. You don't have to. And I don't know if I want to be in charge of a restaurant empire or whatever it is you think I was meant for." Harold nodded. "Fair. But I am willing to start knowing you." At that, Harold's eyes glistened. "Then that's enough for me," he said. That night, Ella returned home and stood in front of her bathroom mirror again. She didn't look different, but she felt different. Not like a stranger, not like a new person, but like someone who had finally stood in both halves of herself and had chosen to stay whole. She picked up her phone and texted Jack tomorrow night. "Pizza. Your place? I'll bring the napkins." Then she looked at the mirror one last time and whispered to her reflection, "Ella, Isabel, both, and still me." The next few days unfolded like a quiet unraveling. Ella returned to Campiano Central, and for the first time in her life, people looked at her differently, but not in the way she feared. There was no whispering behind her back, no exaggerated courtesy. Just an unspoken understanding, a respect that didn't need to be named. She was still Ella, but now there was a story behind her eyes that even the toughest shift couldn't wash away. Still, the weight of it followed her home. It clung to her shoulders in the silence between conversations. It hummed in the moments after laughter. It waited in the gap between the girl she had been and the woman she was trying to become. Jack noticed. He always did. They sat together that Saturday evening on his back porch, the spring air warm and smelling faintly of cut grass and the neighbors' blooming lilacs. Lily was inside watching a movie, humming softly through the screen door. Ella stared into her lemonade like it held answers. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You've been quiet. I've been adjusting." To being an heiress, he teased gently. She shot him a look, but there was no bite behind it. "Don't start. I'm just saying," he grinned. "If you suddenly show up in a limo, I'll know what happened." Ella sighed. "What if I told you I don't know what I want anymore? Not with him. Not with all of this. I thought finding out where I came from would feel like closure, but it just opened more doors I'm not ready to walk through." Jack's voice softened. "Closure isn't always about slamming a door shut. Sometimes it's just standing in the doorway long enough to breathe." She looked at him, and for a moment there was a stretch of stillness between them, comfortable and electric at once. Then she said, "I still wear the clip, you know, even though I know where it came from now. I don't think it matters where it came from. I think it matters who chose to keep it." She studied him. "You always say the right thing." "No," he said quietly. "I just say the true thing. You're the one who does something brave with it." Later that night, after Ella had gone home, Jack sat alone in his kitchen drinking tea from a chipped mug. The apartment was still. Lily had fallen asleep halfway through her movie, her small hands wrapped around a stuffed bear with one ear missing. Jack glanced at his phone. He'd almost told Ella tonight. Almost told her what Lily had asked the week before, innocently curiously the way only children could ask. "Do you think Ella would ever be my real mom?" He hadn't answered then, and he wasn't sure he could answer now, because as much as he wanted to believe that this thing growing between them was steady and inevitable, he knew too well that some people had been torn apart too many times to trust the stitching. The next day, Ella visited the care home where her foster mother now lived. The building was clean and warm, with soft lighting and nurses who smiled tiredly. The kind of place where time moved slower because there were fewer people left trying to outrun it. Her foster mother, Margaret, sat in a chair by the window staring out at the courtyard. Her once bright eyes were fogged now, her voice faint and inconsistent. Some days she remembered Ella's name. Most days she just called her sweetheart. "Hi, Margie," Ella said softly, kneeling beside her. Margaret turned, blinking slowly. "You brought the sun with you again." Ella smiled. "I think the sun was already here." She took Margaret's hand, thin, papery, but still warm. "I found out something," she said. "Something big." Margaret blinked, distant. I found out who I was. Before you. I met him." She waited. "Nothing." Then just barely, Margaret murmured, "You always were a gift. I didn't steal you. I just couldn't let go." Ella nodded, tears stinging. "I know," she whispered. I understand now." Margaret reached up slowly, brushing Ella's cheek with shaking fingers. "Still my girl," she said, and then closed her eyes, drifting back into sleep. Ella stayed there a long time, her head resting gently against Margaret's leg, the silence not painful now, but full, whole, forgiving. That evening, Ella returned to her apartment and sat in the quiet. She didn't turn on music. She didn't reach for her phone. She reached for the envelope instead, the one Harold had given her in the park, the one with her mother's handwriting on the front. She opened it. Inside was a letter. The paper was delicate, but the ink had held up. "My darling Isabel. I don't know who you'll become or what your voice will sound like when you laugh, or if you'll grow to love painting or poetry or dancing barefoot in the garden like I did. But I want you to know that from the moment I saw you, I knew you would never belong to me. You would belong to the world. You are not a possession. You are a purpose. And whatever this life gives you, don't ever let them tell you that your softness is weakness. Your kindness will be your compass. Follow it even when you're lost. And if you ever feel far from home, close your eyes. Listen to your heart. That's where I'll always be. With all my love, Mom." Ella wept, not in sorrow, not in anger, but in release. And when the tears dried, she folded the letter, neatly kissed the edge of the paper, and placed it beside her pillow. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew who she was now. Ella, Isabel. Not either or. Both. Whole. Finally. The spring sun peeked through the blinds of Jack's kitchen, casting golden stripes across the worn tile floor. He stood at the counter flipping pancakes with a precision that only came from years of single fatherhood. Lily sat at the table humming and coloring while periodically sneaking chocolate chips into her mouth. Ella had texted late the night before, "Are you home in the morning? I need a place to breathe." He hadn't hesitated. Always. The knock came right on cue. He opened the door to find her standing there in jeans, a hoodie, and that old clip in her hair still clinging, still symbolic. But something about her was different. Her posture, her stillness, the way she didn't flinch at her own presence. "You look," Jack said, then paused, unsure. "Like I finally stopped running," she offered. "Yeah, like that." He stepped aside and she stepped in, inhaling the familiar scent of cinnamon and maple syrup. Lily grinned from her chair. "We saved you the biggest pancake." Ella smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "That's the best kind." As they ate, the room filled with casual chatter about school projects, which crayon colors were superior, and why pancakes were better than waffles because pancakes don't scratch your throat. But beneath it all, a deeper current stirred. After breakfast, Lily settled on the couch to read, and Jack motioned for Ella to follow him outside. They stepped into the modest backyard, a patch of grass, a tired fence, and a garden box filled with stubborn mint. Jack leaned against the porch railing. "You want to tell me where you've been?" Ella took a breath. "With him. My Harold. We've had a few conversations. It's been a lot, I figured. He gave me a letter," she said, "from my mother, my birth mother. She wrote it when I was born." Jack's brows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. She said, "She knew I didn't belong to her, that I belonged to the world." Jack studied her. "And how does that feel? Like someone handed me a name I forgot I was born with, and it fits, but not like a glove, more like a coat I've grown into." He nodded, then asked softly, "So what?" Now Ella hesitated. "I want to go back, to where it started. Not the fancy Manhattan office, the old Campiano's, Brooklyn. That's where I first felt seen, where someone handed me a napkin and said, 'You're not invisible.'" Jack's throat tightened. He didn't need to ask who that someone had been. "I want to build something real," she said. "Not because it's a legacy or an empire, because it's a place where people matter." Jack met her eyes. "You don't need permission, Ella. You never did." She stepped closer. "Would you help me?" "With what?" "With everything." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that held disbelief and joy in equal measure. "You're serious?" "I want to open a place," she said. "A small one. Not corporate, not perfect, just honest, with long tables and mismatched chairs and pie that tastes like someone's childhood." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "You've thought about this a lot." "I've lived it," she said. "Now I want to give it back." Over the next few weeks they made plans. Not grand ones, not glossy or investor-backed. Real ones. They visited the old Brooklyn Campianos together, now closed for renovations. Harold had offered it to her quietly with no fanfare, no conditions. "If it's going to be used again," he said, "let it be by someone who remembers how it felt to cry behind the kitchen door and still show up the next morning." Jack had started sketching layouts. Ella had started writing menu notes on napkins. Lily, ever the mascot, suggested a name, Lily's Table. "Because it's where everything starts," she said with certainty, "and where people come back to." Ella cried when she heard that. Not the sobbing kind. The kind where a single tear falls and you realize your whole life has led to this single quiet moment. One afternoon, while painting the front sign with Jack, Ella asked him, "Why didn't you ever leave?" After Beth died, Jack paused, brush in hand. "I thought about it," he said. "A lot. But every time I looked at Lily, I knew that if I ran I'd miss the miracle that came next." Ella nodded slowly. "You're that miracle too," he added. She looked at him startled. "I know you've been through hell," he said, "but somehow you made it out, not bitter, not angry, just better, kinder." Her voice trembled. "Do you mean that Jack smiled?" "I've never meant anything more." They sat on the stoop as the sun dipped low, the new sign drying above them. Lily's Table. Where kindness begins. Ella leaned her head on Jack's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, easy and sure. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. He kissed her temple gently. "It's a beginning," he said. And for the first time in her life she didn't flinch at the idea of staying. She didn't feel like someone living on borrowed space or borrowed time. She felt like someone who had stood still long enough to know this love, this table, this life was hers. And she was finally ready to claim it. The first time the front door of Lily's Table opened to the public, it wasn't with fanfare. There were no press releases, no social media blitzes, no velvet ropes. Just a chalkboard sign on the sidewalk that read, "Grand reopening, come in hungry, leave seen." It was a Saturday morning in late spring. The air smelled like warm pavement and honeysuckle. The sun filtered through the big front windows, bouncing off glass jars filled with fresh-cut herbs and old silverware collected from thrift stores. Mismatched chairs had been sanded and repainted in soft pastels. Handwritten menus sat rolled into napkin rings. Ella stood behind the counter wiping her hands on a clean apron. She glanced around at what they'd built, not perfect but purposeful. Jack emerged from the back, adjusting the music speaker. "You ready?" "Not even a little," she said, laughing nervously. He grinned. "That's a good sign." Lily, standing on a milk crate behind the hostess stand, looked up from the coloring book she'd been using to keep busy for the last hour. "I'm ready." Ella smiled and reached over to squeeze her hand. "Then that makes one of us." The first customers were a retired couple who used to eat at the Brooklyn Campianos every Sunday after church. They paused in the doorway as if trying to reconcile memory with reality. "It smells the same," the man said, voice full of wonder. "Like rosemary and garlic and I don't know." Hope Ella greeted them personally and seated them near the front window. The second group was a young woman and her son. The boy had autism and the woman nervously asked if it was okay if he made noise. Ella knelt beside him, offered him a basket of crayons, and said, "Hear noise is part of the recipe." By lunchtime, the small space was full. Jack moved between tables, checking on equipment and helping run food. Ella floated from guest to guest, refilling coffee, offering samples of the day's peach tart, and laughing, truly laughing with the kind of ease she never thought she'd find. In the corner, a reserved table remained empty, until Harold Campiano walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. Instead, he wore a blue Oxford shirt, sleeves rolled, hands tucked nervously in his pockets. He paused at the doorway, unsure whether to enter as a CEO or a father. Ella saw him excused herself from the table she was at and met him halfway. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it." She glanced at the apron he held in one hand. "Is that—" "I signed up for dish duty," he said sheepishly. "If that's allowed." Ella blinked, then laughed, and handed him a clean apron. "Just don't break anything." In the kitchen, Harold washed dishes alongside the teen prep cook who clearly had no idea who he was, and that Ella thought might be the most healing part of all. As she cleared a table later that afternoon, a customer tugged gently at her sleeve. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you the owner?" Ella hesitated. "Yes, one of them." "Well, I just wanted to say, this place feels like someone prayed it into existence." Ella's eyes stung, but she smiled. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After the last table cleared, the team gathered in the dining room. Dishes were stacked, chairs lifted. The scent of the last pot of coffee still lingered. Ella raised a glass of lemonade. "To kindness," she said, "and to second chances, and to building a place where no one has to earn belonging." They clinked glasses, even Harold. Then, to Ella's surprise, Jack stepped forward. "I know this isn't on the schedule," he said, voice slightly nervous, "but I have one more thing to say." He looked at her eyes, soft and steady. "Ella, the first time I saw you, you were standing under a fluorescent light with wine on your apron and a fire in your eyes. And I remember thinking, that woman's been through something. But I didn't know then that you'd become someone who could rebuild not just a place, but a heart." He dropped to one knee. The room froze. Lily gasped, "Are you serious right now?" Ella laughed, tears already streaming. Jack pulled out a ring, not flashy, not expensive. Just silver with a tiny engraved lily on its band. "I don't want to fix you. You don't need fixing. I just want to stand still beside you for the rest of my life." Ella opened her mouth, but no words came out. So she nodded, and laughed through the tears, and said the only word that mattered, "Yes." Later that night, the restaurant sat quiet in the glow of the cleaning lights. Ella walked through the empty room, fingers tracing the edge of table 6, the one where she first served Lily pancakes she hadn't ordered. The table where her old life had started to end and her real one had begun to bloom. Harold walked in quietly, drying his hands on a towel. "I never thought I'd see this again," he said, looking around. "Neither did I." He took something from his pocket, a small velvet box. "I was going to wait, but I think you're ready." Inside was her mother's pearl ring, not a symbol of wealth, but of intention. "I want you to have this," Harold said, "not because of who you were, but because of who you've chosen to become." Ella held the ring gently, then nodded. "Thank you, Dad." He swallowed hard and smiled. Outside, the sign above the door flickered in the breeze. "Lily's Table, where kindness begins." And behind the glass, in the place where loneliness had once sat, love now had a permanent reservation. Spring melted gently into early summer, and Lily's Table found its rhythm like a song the neighborhood had always known by heart. By 9 every morning, the front windows steamed with the scent of cinnamon rolls and rosemary quiche. By noon, lines began to curl around the block, families, retirees, students, the lonely and the loved, drawn not just by the food, but by something quieter, deeper belonging. Ella had once lived in fear of names, of what they meant, of what they could erase. But now she signed 2 on every form: Ella Reynolds, the girl who endured; Isabel Campiano, the daughter who was found. Both were true. Both were hers. One Monday afternoon, Ella stepped into the back room of the restaurant where a small chalkboard wall displayed scribbles left by guests. The pancakes taste like Sunday mornings. I came alone, but I didn't feel alone. This place knows my name. She ran her fingers over the words and smiled, heart full. In the corner of the room, Harold sat with Lily, teaching her how to fold napkins into swans. "You're getting better," he said, adjusting her hands gently. "I'm going to be the folding manager," Lily declared. Ella leaned against the doorframe and watched them. Her daughter, because that's what it felt like now with the grandfather she never imagined. Not one of power and suits, but of steady hands and quiet redemption. That evening, just before closing, Jack arrived carrying a picnic basket. He wore his usual blue work shirt and a sheepish grin. "You're not allowed to bring outside food into my restaurant," Ella teased. He held up the basket. "Even if it's homemade lemon bars." She narrowed her eyes. "You're lucky I love you." "That's the plan." They spread a blanket on the roof of the building, an old maintenance access spot they'd converted into their unofficial sanctuary. From up there, the city looked softer, like it too had exhaled. They ate lemon bars and watched the sun melt behind the skyline. Ella rested her head on Jack's shoulder. "I didn't think love would feel this quiet," she whispered. He kissed her hair. "The good kind always does." As dusk deepened, Ella reached into her pocket and pulled out the pearl clip, slightly worn, slightly tarnished. "I think I'm ready to let this go," she said. Jack turned to her, brow raised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It carried me when I didn't know who I was. But now, I don't need it to remember anymore." She set it beside the candle lantern they'd lit, its light catching on the mother of pearl. Then, from the rooftop, she looked down at the glowing sign below. "Lily's table, where kindness begins." And she thought of all the kindnesses that had saved her. A man who handed her a napkin when the world mocked her. A little girl who saw her not as broken, but beautiful. A father who never stopped believing even when the whole world told him to. A stranger's letter, written in hope, received in time. A restaurant. A table. A name. The next morning, Ella woke early. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a white dress, simple flowing, not flashy. Lily burst into the room in a floral crown she'd insisted on making herself. "Do I look like a flower princess?" she asked breathlessly. Ella smiled at her in the mirror. "You look like the most important girl in the world." "You too," Lily said, then paused. "Are you nervous?" Ella thought about that. "No," she said, surprised by the truth of it. "Not even a little." The wedding was held in the restaurant under the string lights and the hand-painted mural Lily had helped design. Friends, neighbors, staff, and a few guests who had once come in as strangers now sat at the long, mismatched tables, clapping and laughing as Jack and Ella exchanged vows. Harold walked her down the aisle. No speeches, just a quiet moment before he handed her off with a kiss on the forehead and eyes full of peace. When Ella said "I do," it was more than a promise to love. It was a promise to keep choosing joy, to keep staying still even when fear whispered otherwise, to keep building tables, families, bridges, to keep remembering that she was never lost, only waiting to be known. That night, after the music faded and the last guest left, Ella stood alone in the dining room. The lights were low. She walked slowly to table 6, the one where it all began. She sat down and placed her palm on the wood, now worn smoother than before. Then she whispered, "Thank you." For the moment she thought was the end. That turned out to be her beginning. And somewhere out in the city, another woman sat alone at a table wondering if kindness still existed in the world. One day, maybe soon, she'd walk into Lily's table. And Ella would greet her not as a stranger but as someone who understood. Because kindness never forgets. And love always remembers your name. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and tell us what part of this story touched your heart the most.